Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host as always, Alex, and with me once again I have Logan.
Good evening, everyone.
And I've also got Dan.
Hello.
We'll start with the game against Burnley on the weekend, which I suppose there's mixed emotions about the game because going into it, we obviously were all three predicting a victory, and we only came away with a draw in it. But it seems like, at least against Burnley, we always seem to play our worst football. So I'll start with you, Logan, on this one. Do you see that as probably our worst display in the league under Silva?
It's an interesting one. To say it was our worst display in the league under Silva would probably be a bit harsh because I don't think we were all that bad overall. I think in patches we were certainly somewhat disjointed, but I do think that the loss of Evandro and Markovic as well, and welcoming back El Mohammadi and Bakani, somewhat played a part in disrupting the kind of setup of what we've been playing with the last few weeks. We looked very different in the kind of style that we played. And I thought that while there were patches where we were, as I mentioned before, disjointed, we still had some really positive patches as well. So to say that we were the worst we've been, it would be somewhat harsh. But in many ways, I guess because of the standards that we have set ourselves since Marco Silva's taken over, it might actually end up being, if you can call it that, our worst performance without it being horrible.
I actually read something the other day. I think it was Swanee wrote that that the reaction that the fans have had in the lead up to that game is a little bit unrealistic. That in where we are in the table and where Burnley is and how comparing the way we've been playing, that being disappointed with the draw is it's both a sign of the change in the perception of the club, but also it's a little bit shows that the fans, we are becoming a little bit perhaps a little bit unrealistic in our expectations so soon, which I thought was an interesting and probably a fair point as well.
Yeah, and I guess the fact that we did take the lead only to have it snatched away only a couple of minutes later does make it a bit tougher to take as well. The penalty was scored by Huddleston, though this one was a bit more, it was closer to being saved than his penalty against United, but went the same way. So it'll be interesting to see if he sticks with the penalty taking duties. Obviously, we can all remember his penalty miss in the Europa League when we could have won that first leg against Trenchant, I think it was. The goal that we conceded from Keane, though, it was from a set piece, it was from a corner, it was at the far post, where we've conceded a fair few goals this season. Most notably comes to mind is that West Brom game where I think we conceded 2 or 3 pretty poor goals from corners. We had the same troubles to a lesser extent under Bruce, and certainly we had them under Phelan. So why is it, or why does it seem to be a case that we've struggled so much with set pieces under 3 different managers?
I thought it's an interesting one because I almost felt like when we were struggling from set pieces, it was very rare that Mike Phelan would actually address that in his press conference. It was the kind of thing that, whether that was getting spoken about on the training ground or not is another matter. But Marco Silva seems quite blunt in his assessment. When we do make those mistakes of a set piece, he's very harsh and very honest in his match report, and he'll come out and he'll say, we weren't good enough on set pieces. And it's clearly an area that has been targeted by City on the training ground. And regardless, in the last few weeks, it has been much better than it was previously.
Yeah, I've went through and looked at, did a bit of research this afternoon and had a look at some of the stats. And so, it's a bit hard. It's early days, a bit hard to compare. But in 20 games under Phelan, we conceded 44 goals at 2.2 goals a game, and that was a man-to-man defense that Phelan was employing. Silva's changed that to a zonal defense and put a lot of work on the training ground in getting these players to know where they've got to be and what they've got to do. And it's 6 goals in 6 games. It's a goal a game in the league, which that's a massive improvement over such a short amount of time. It would be concerning though that we are still, I think, of those 6 goals, 4 have been from set pieces. 2 were penalties, 2 were corners that were cleared only for the resulting cross that got put back in to be a player at the far post knocking it in. Keane on the weekend, and then it was it Kale at Chelsea, I think.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Uh,
that might have been straight from a corner. Oh, actually, you might be right. It might have been a second phase play or something like that. Yeah.
but like I mean, it comes down to the fact that like whether we're getting the first ball from the corner, like we should still be doing more to get it out of the area or being more controlled with it or something like. But so like there's obviously there's still concerns over their ability, whether it's like people are not, is it whether like individuals are not tracking their runners, or is it a concentration, like just a concentration lap? Is it a communication error where the person it's at the front who can see the ball is about to be whipped in, are they not calling to the person at the back who's got 20 men in front of him? Does he not know that there's a cross coming in? Like,
and that was the observation. I think it was Ndai and it was somebody else. It might have been Ranocchia, or it might have been someone else. I can't remember who it was. Where they both actually went for the ball, and by both going for the ball, they left that space there for Keane. So in theory, we were covering the goal, and the goal shouldn't have happened. But the fact that both players lacked that communication.
well, I think that's I think the same at Chelsea, wasn't it? It was Nias had dropped back and Robbo there, I think, and it looked like Nias was going to go for it, and then at the last minute he ducked out of the way for some weird reason, and then it fell straight to
look, yeah.
No, and then it fell straight for the runner who's coming at the back post. But I think it is also important to notice that in those situations when that ball gets whipped back in, the attacker has advantage. They're moving onto the ball and stuff, and it is like we should be doing more, and we have to be aware of those situations and be doing more. But I think you got to give, I guess, credit where it's due. Like the attackers, they're making those runs and they're getting, they get the advantage. They've got momentum to make the leap or whatever. But,
well, it'll be interesting because we've got Leicester on the weekend, who must be one of the only teams in the league who are worse than us at set pieces. Because I can remember there was a lot of discussion about how many goals they were conceding from set pieces, certainly early in the season. That might have trailed off a little bit recently, but I haven't really watched a whole lot of Leicester apart from the Liverpool game earlier this week. But another bugbear that seems to have reared its head again this week, and we don't want to be seen to be moaning about the referees week in, week out, but it is becoming a bit of a contentious one, that we do seem to have a lot of refereeing decisions going against us. Granted, we got the penalty on the weekend, which I think was a pretty fair call for a penalty, but the fact that George Boyd wasn't sent off or even carded for his tackle on Harry Maguire, I just thought was quite outrageous, really, when you've got Harry Maguire showing the ref the stud marks on his leg. It's akin to a player going up to the ref and saying, "He's bitten me, look at the bite marks." There's physical evidence of the studs on his leg. How the ref can't then say, "Okay, well, it's at least deserving of a yellow for a reckless tackle," or something like that. We've discussed it a lot. I'll start with you, Logan, just for your quick thoughts on it as well. But what do you make of these issues that we're having, whether it is an issue really, with the refereeing decisions?
Look, I've got to be honest with you. I was very surprised that Boyd did stay on the field. And I think it was one of those ones that was kind of blatantly obvious for all to see. And as you said, there was the proof on Harry Maguire's shin and all the rest of it to suggest that there was, in fact, stud showing. And again, similar to the Markovic incident at Arsenal, it's not one of these incidences where you kind of sit there and go, "Oh, it could have gone either way." You're right. It's the blatant ones that seem to be creeping in. And as Curtis Davies, I think, mentioned in the press in the commentary box at the Arsenal game, he was saying it's these kind of decisions that are the difference between teams staying up and teams getting relegated. And I thought that was really insightful perspective for him to be sitting in the box at that time, to be able to kind of shed some light on the magnitude of, whilst a lot of England kind of sit in the big four dream that the big teams are almost expected to get the calls, to hear it on the flip side that yes, these clubs that do get those big decisions against them, it is the difference between them staying up or not. I think it just puts a huge perspective on why City fans do feel aggrieved that there are decisions like this that seem to continually be going against us.
Yeah, and it's a bit funny. I mean, whenever I've had those sorts of discussions with people who support those bigger clubs who might get those decisions in their favour, they'll often say, oh, well, it swings and roundabouts. But I kind of sit there and think, okay, well, we had the offside goal from Matter in the League Cup. Maybe you say, well, the Maguire penalty in the return leg was soft, so maybe those balance out. But then you've got the Costa goal against us at Chelsea, where we had a foul in the lead up. We had the Arsenal goals for Sanchez and the red cards not given. We've had this now with Boyd. There have been quite a few where, as you say, they're blatant decisions and they're not going in our favour. And I can't remember the last time I think the last time, honestly, the last time that we got a decision in our favour where I've looked at it and I said, that was the wrong call, but we've got it in our favour, was probably the Snodgrass dive against Palace. That's the last time I can recall a decision going in our favour where I thought, yeah, geez, we really got away with one there. Dan, what are your thoughts on it?
Look, I think I agree with you boys that the foul from Boyd was disgraceful. It was really bad, and it was reckless. It was dangerous. I have no idea how he escaped some sort of punishment. I don't know how good the match review panel is in England, if they're going to look at that and go, that he deserves something for that, but I doubt it. I think the only thing that saved Boyd, and after we talked up Huddleston last week about being smart, was him kicking out at Boyd. That totally distracted the referee, only just for long enough for him to go, whoa, like that was bad, but you can't go and do that. And then he was standing up and Boyd was on the ground, and I think it just threw a spanner in the works of the referee's mind for just long enough.
If anything, if anything, that frustrates me more, because I think, well, you're giving Huddleston a yellow card, which is fair enough. Huddleston deserved a yellow card for shoving Boyd, but you think, well, there must have been something bad for Huddleston in the first place to do that, to have that reaction. And second of all, if you're giving Huddleston a yellow for shoving Boyd, at least give Boyd a yellow card in return for what he did, if that's how you're going to scale the offences.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not trying to, not trying to, say the ref was in the right. He clearly got the wrong decision. But I think there was, unfortunately, Huddleston's decision to kick out at Boyd as he went past or give him a shove or whatever was just enough that it upset the ref's train of thought. And I guess again, like with what Curtis Davies was saying, like it's just those sort of things like that are going to go against the smaller clubs in these positions, and we I hope we don't, but it could be the sort of thing that costs us come the end of the season.
The other thing, which of course bad luck seems to come in threes, we've had issues with our set pieces, we've had issues with the refereeing, and we also have issues with injuries, because the news broke last night our time, I think, or this morning our time, that Mbakani is now out for 6 weeks with a hamstring injury. We've already heard that Harry Maguire had an injection after the game, and he's sort of touch and go for the Leicester game, though it looks like they're erring on the side of he should be right to play. We've got Evandro and Markovic coming back, but they missed out against Burnley with injuries as well. We had these discussions, I know, Logan, you and I had plenty of discussions about this when Bruce was our manager the last time we went down, and we had a lot of injuries. But it seems like it's a recurring theme, whether it's an issue with the medical staff, whether it's just plain bad luck, I don't know what it is. But Logan, what are your thoughts on our injury list, first of all, and how the squad's going to cope with it?
Look, it's an interesting one, and as you said, you were highly critical of the Steve Bruce regime, in particular because it does kind of seem that the same players seem to be getting the same long-standing injuries. I mean, it's very hard to remember a time or a season or a spell when Abel Hernandez, in his time at the club, where he's had a patch of games for an extended period of time. He always seems to pop up and get his 4 or 5 weeks. Michael Dawson's another one that comes to mind. That seems to be these reoccurring injuries with the same type players. There's been a lot made of Marco Silva's different training methods and the intensity. Whether that contributes anything to our current injury toll, I'm not so sure. I think it is just a case of it's the Premier League season, and when the games come thick and fast, you do seem to be under the pump at stages, and all clubs have those problems, which is why you have to carry much larger squads than you once did. I mean, Leicester are probably the exception to the rule with last season, and the fact that they showed what momentum can do when you do have your kind of first team almost available for selection on a week in, week out basis. I don't think there's any really kind of key points or anything that we can highlight to suggest why these injuries are occurring. But to be perfectly honest, I don't think that the Mbakani injury is as big a blow as
No.
as we kind of suspect. I think
If anything, it makes Silva's decision easier because we can only have those 5 loanees in the squad. So, assuming the other 5 are fit, it now gives him quite an easy decision.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that, as we've highlighted, Harry Maguire's form at late has been incredible. And I think for a loss of his calibre at the moment would be far more detrimental than Mbakani, although he tries, hasn't really seemed to offer too much in his time in a City shirt.
Yeah, well, on that note, we'll actually discuss now probably the best players in the game, the standouts in the game, and a general discussion of how they impacted on the match, because we've talked about a lot of the incidents, but not the game itself in too much detail. I mean, personally, I thought, like, as you've just touched on there with Maguire, I thought he had an amazing game again, and he really epitomises the spirit of the team at the moment. Something I think Silva touched on in his hopes that Maguire would be fit for the weekend. But the fact that he had that knee injury in the first half and then was able to carry on and still put in the game that he played was fantastic. I thought some of his passes in the final third when he got up there were a bit stray, and it seemed a general issue with the team with a couple of players. I know Maloney was also guilty of it quite a bit with turning the ball over after a nice bit of play. But I thought Maguire was one of the standouts for me. Dan, who stood out for you in the match?
Grosicki stood out for me, but on both sides. Like, he stood out as being really, really good, and he showed some brilliant skills, some brilliant pace, did some really good things, and then just sort of couldn't finish off the move that he started. And I think he deserves credit for that. He's in the new team and stuff, and I mean, soon that excuse is got to run out. It's probably getting close to being a worn out excuse now, honestly. But he's doing all of the good work, and then it was just it was a cross that was too short or too shallow, or the bad touch in the box when if he gets the right touch, he has to put it away. That curling shot that just goes past the post. I think he did a lot to help us going forward. I think going forward on the pitch, I think he was probably the standout player offensively. But I mean, coming back to like the flip side, again, the centre half pairing I thought were very good. Just as usual, that just seems to be the standard response now is who was good this week, and it was Welcome. Maguire was very good once again, and and Ranocchia was there to support once again, and got some timely interceptions, and yeah.
Logan, who did you have as standouts in the match?
Yeah, I'm with Dan. I thought the two central defenders were incredibly impressive, as per usual. It almost seems these days. I thought Huddleston was still quite good as well. Obviously, chipped in with the goal, albeit a very lucky one in the end. And yeah, actually, I agree with Dan. I thought Grosicki was contributed very well, but at the same time, yeah, just lacked that quality in the final third, particularly. I also thought Maloney showed good patches, but again, as you mentioned before, Alex, him in the final third and his last pass kind of did leave a lot to the imagination. But yeah,
I think Maloney. I think Maloney's one that really sort of he's a bit of an enigma, because I feel like he's a fantastic player off the bench when he's coming on for that final 30 minutes, and he's got the legs, and then his skills kind of get him through and unlock defences. But I just feel like when he starts a game, he just doesn't have the energy to sort of match it with the other players.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he's a very crafty player, and I think he does have that quality to unlock defences. But as you mentioned, I think that it's almost much better served later in the game when he is fresh and he does only require that short stint.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a disappointing result in the sense that we were sort of hoping for a win, but as we've touched on, I suppose it's a good thing not to have lost to Burnley for a change, and 2 points against them this season is certainly better than the no points that we received in the 2014-15 season. We'll move on then and we'll discuss our player of the week, which is Curtis Davies, who's our sometimes captain, sometimes not, depending on whether Dawson's in the team or what's going on at a particular time. But he signed for us in 2013 for a bit over £2 million, and I have to admit, when we first signed him, I hadn't heard a lot about him. I knew he'd played for Birmingham, but I didn't quite remember him from our encounters with him that season, and I think that was the season where we'd beaten them 5-2 at their place or something like that. So didn't have high hopes for him, but boy did he hit the ground running that first season. I mean, he was, I'm pretty sure he won our player of the season that year, and he had a fair few calls for the for getting up into the England squad as well. And he had actually a pretty prolific start with his time with us. Obviously scored the goal against Cardiff early in the season to earn us a draw. I think he scored another goal in the league as well, but probably most famously he scored our second goal in the FA Cup final against Arsenal. And then, as I've touched on, obviously he's drifted in and out of the team over the next few years, whether it was because Dawson had come in or whether there was issues between him and Bruce about various things. He got dropped a bit towards the end of that season. I remember he had that issue in that Sunderland game where he gave away the goal after a couple of minutes. But he seemed to work back to a bit of decent form last season, and he's kind of continued on that this season when he's been fit. I'll start with you, Logan. What's your favourite memory of Davies so far in a City shirt?
I think Curtis Davies for me is certainly a personal favourite, and he has been for some time. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, I'm pretty sure that when Steve Bruce did sign him, I remember there had been a little bit of controversy around that signing because of, I think it was maybe Jack Hobbs at the time was potentially the club captain and playing quite well. And when they Steve Bruce had targeted Curtis Davies as his man to come in and kind of replace him and play that role. And particularly with Curtis Davies having that kind of journeyman feel to him where he'd been at a few different clubs before and never really cracked it. I thought that was really significant that he came in, similar to Ranieri a couple of weeks ago when we were kind of seeing the doubts of whether he was actually going to be a contributor or kind of dead wood. And obviously, as you mentioned, he hit the ground running. So Curtis Davies, for me, kind of started up against it with it all to do. And I'm pretty sure that my favourite Curtis Davies memory would have to be that header against Sunderland in the quarter-final, I think, of the FA Cup. I think that stands out as a pretty big one, and also the goal he scored at Wembley, of course, in the final.
How about you, Dan? What's your favourite memory of Davies so far?
Yeah, I'd have to go with the goal from the final against Arsenal. I can still remember, you know, where I was sitting exactly, what house and what TV and who I was with and everything about it, and I can remember that goal, and it was I honestly thought, you know, at that point, that he'd won us the cup. I'm not going to lie. It didn't turn out that way. We got unlucky with the remainder of the game. But I've got to that's the one. That's my memory.
Do you think obviously that season he was in pretty stellar form for us throughout the campaign, and there were chants of Curtis for England at a number of games where Roy Hodgson was in attendance, and he'd obviously been called up to the England squad a couple of times previously, though he hasn't won any caps to date. We discussed it last week in terms of Huddleston, but do you think Davies has also been a bit unfortunate in terms of not getting the call up for England, Dan?
Yeah, honestly, at times when he's been in his patches of form, and you've been looking at the England team and looking at the results and them underperforming, and particularly with their defence being, getting caught out, by some of the other top teams in the world, and you go, well, here's a guy who's experienced, he's a quality centre back, he's in form. Why is he not getting a look in? And I do honestly think that there were times when he definitely should have got, even if it was only called into the training squad or something, because I think he has definitely in periods shown enough to warrant getting a call up.
And Logan, I've kind of alluded to it, and you've also touched on it in terms of when he first came to the club with Jack Hobbs at the club as the club captain. But do you think that there's been a bit of a harsh treatment of Davies in terms of the captaincy? I mean, I think Dawson came in the following season, and he sort of earned the captain's armband after a few months at the club. Davies wasn't really given a fair go at it. Obviously, there was that article by Swan a couple of months ago, I think, or might have even been last season, where he was sort of calling into question Davies' captaincy material. To which Davies sort of responded saying he's been a captain wherever he's gone. But do you think he's sort of been harshly dealt with in terms of all of that?
No, personally, I think that's a fine decision. I actually really admire Michael Dawson's leadership. Not taking anything away from who Curtis Davies is, but I think at the end of the day, Curtis Davies came to Hull on a $2.25 million transfer fee, which obviously is not much. And I think that whilst he has been an incredible player for us over the time that he has been in a City jersey, I think there's also moments like perhaps that, if you'll remember, when he gave that gift of a goal to Sunderland when he did that kind of back pass slip over and Adam Johnson came through. I think that there's just been a few moments like that that's kind of stood out for me as to the differences why Curtis Davies has never really taken that extra step. And for me, Michael Dawson just doesn't seem to have those kind of mistakes in his game. And I think that he kind of leads from the front. And obviously he has pedigree coming from Tottenham, which is, I think, is another thing that obviously kind of keeps him in the kind of the front seat for the captaincy. So I don't have a huge problem with it. But I do also think that Davies is a great leader and is, certainly no slouch when you do give him the captain's armband.
Well, we're unfortunately without either of those centre-backs for our trip to Leicester on the weekend, and they're without a manager at this stage, having sacked Ranieri just a few days ago. They had that bounce back against Liverpool, which I guess we can look at in two different ways. Either it's going to give them a bit of momentum heading into the game against us, or there's been quite a bit of media backlash about their performance and how they've suddenly switched a form switch on and suddenly started to look quite good. Do we think it's a good thing that they've already had that game against Liverpool, or do we think that, as I've said, that sort of gives them a bit of momentum?
I would say, honestly, I think it could go either way. You always want to avoid the managerial bounce, so to speak. That first game after a manager gets sacked, there always seems to be some sort of a response from the playing group. And I think it was good to avoid that. But at the same time, they did away with Liverpool so convincingly that if it had been a scrappy 1-0 win, I'd have been much happier. I'd be super happy, super ready for them this weekend. But dispatching Liverpool 3-1, that's not an easy thing to do. And so I think that they will carry a little bit of form and a fair bit of confidence into the game on the weekend.
I think the main trap Liverpool seemed to have fallen into was their high line, and I think having such a slow defence really played into Leicester's hands, especially allowing Vardy to get in behind. And I remember the first game of the season when we beat them at home, there was a lot of commentary about the fact that we'd played so deep and denied them so much space, which meant that Vardy and Musa couldn't actually get in behind and take advantage of that sort of space behind. So I'm really hoping that Silva sort of follows that blueprint again and we can really sort of contain them quite well. We've already touched on the fact that Evandro Markovic should now be fit. Klukas back from suspension as well. Mpakani dropping out with that injury. So how do we see the 11 line changing from the Burnley game, Logan?
I think that as you touched on, the Mpakani injury is crucial, and I think that the way that we will play Leicester, obviously being away from home, will be similar to the blueprint that Marco Silva employed against Liverpool. And I think that obviously Niasse will probably come back in at start. I would be very surprised to not see him start the game. I wouldn't be surprised if Markovic returns to see El Mohammadi drop back to the bench, which I'd be quite happy with. I've got a sneaking suspicion that Evandro will start, and I think Klukas will come off the bench. But obviously, that depends on other factors like whether Harry Maguire ends up taking his place and whether Huddleston has to drop back to centre-back. I think it's going to be an interesting one, and I actually don't think it's one that we'll be able to hazard a guess at until later in the week when we get a better idea of who's available.
It's also interesting because I noted when we signed Alfred and Jay that he's also able to play as a makeshift centre-back, but I noticed on the weekend against Burnley, when we played with such a high line with our fullbacks pushing up into the Burnley half, that it was Huddleston dropping back to sort of make that back three when we had the ball, rather than NGA. So that sort of suggested to me that if Maguire wasn't fit for the weekend, it would in fact be Huddleston who drops back into that defensive position. Yeah, I mean, the player that we haven't really touched on yet is El Mohammadi, who making his first start under Silva, playing up on the wing, where we've always sort of thought, he's no fullback, but at least he's a good player going forward, and he had flashes of it on the weekend, but on the whole, he was a bit underwhelming, and I'm hoping that's just a bit of rust and a bit of, getting to know the new manager and the new tactics and that sort of thing, because it's a bit of concern that if that's sort of the form he's going to display for the rest of the season, that he will find that spot on the bench, and he's been such an ever-present for us so far in the league that it'd be a bit concerning if that's sort of, if he drops down the rung that quickly and kind of drops out of sight, because he's obviously been a fan favourite over his time at the club so far, and he's gotten up to all sorts of antics. So hopefully it was just a one-off display and he'll bounce back and have a fantastic game if he starts or if he comes off the bench against Leicester. But I'll get a score prediction from each of you now before we sign things off. So I'll start with you, Logan. How do you see the game panning out?
I can see this one going 2-1 City.
Okay, and Dan?
When I made my notes earlier, I had it at a tight 1-0 game to us. But thinking about it, like, it really depends. If we get our best 11 on the field, I think we'll get that 1-0. If we don't, if Maguire doesn't start, I think it'll be a draw.
It'll be really interesting to see how we line up, because I'm sort of in two minds, and I tweeted about it a bit earlier in the week, because you almost want the players that you want to start the game sort of don't fit any possible formation, because I really want to see Hernandez and Nias both starting up top, but I also want to see Evandro in midfield. And if you play Evandro in midfield with Grzycki and Markovic, you can't really play with two strikers, because then you're either sacrificing Huddleston or Njay. The only solution being, if Maguire drops out, Huddleston drops to defence, and we do somehow go with that four-man midfield, which would be an incredibly attacking lineup. But a lot does depend on how we line up. I hope we do see two strikers at some point in the game, because I like to see us playing with two strikers, even though I think Nias seems to be our only striker who can manage as a lone striker up top. I don't know, it's a hard game to read. If Leicester can continue their good form, I can't see us getting the 3 points. I could maybe see us getting a draw, but if we can sort of bounce back from that display against Burnley, and we can show some of the form we showed against Arsenal, against Liverpool, against United, I could see us grinding out a 1-0 smash and grab victory over them. It all depends on the lineup, and it'll be very interesting to see how we line up in this game. But thanks for the lineup we've had tonight. Thanks, Logan.
Not a problem.
And thank you, Dan.
No worries, anytime.
Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Hopefully we can get the 3 points against the Foxes and start charging up the table. So until next time, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're out.